Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to take our new vacuum former and then go a little how-to on making vacuum parts for RC cars. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so the first part of getting a vacuum form is creating a vacuum buck or the mold, whatever you like to call this. So here's some examples, different ones. This is the rear fender of a 95 Toyota Tacoma, and so what I've done here is taken essentially just pieces of MDF, medium density fiberboard. One thing you want to think about when you are sanding and cutting on this, it's not very good for you, so always make sure you wear a really good respirator in a well ventilated space, or at least have some kind of good ventilation. But anyways, starts with just different thicknesses glued together, and then I take a pattern, kind of get a start, rough cut it out on a bandsaw, and then start to shape it. As you'll see, it this one kind of tapers off the front to back. It has a little bit of a hump here, has this little recess here, and the body line is carved in. Also has a spot where a tail light will go. And in the front, one of the things I've figured out is to make a recess so when the mold comes over the top of this, it'll give you a very hard defined line to cut. And what that does is that lines up with the the piece in the front. So he's basically just trying to get registration marks to get this thing as easy as possible. So that's an example one. As you can see here, I've added some styrene, just super glued styrene on to give it a little bit of that lip there. So here is a cowl for a Chevy hood, and again, just added styrene pieces to a MDF block. One of the things I've found out is that when you get these thin pieces, if you do them once, it'll be just fine. But over time, they start to break as you're getting them. It takes quite a bit of force, as you'll see, to get them out of the mold. So what I end up doing is take some thin CA or super glue, and I'll just basically run that, drip that super glue onto this MDF, and it literally just soaks in like it's like a sponge. And so you can tell that this is just a little bit darker than this other piece. And what's happened is I've coated the entire tip of this with this super glue all the way down the sides and right up here along the center. So that the wood is really held together tight with this super glue, and then I come back and sand that down, and that just adds a little bit of strength so it'll last longer. You can get more pulls out of it before it breaks. So another example of using MDF and styrene. This is like a simple door panel. Again, this darker spot is CA glue to strengthen that up. So here is a hood, and it's a 49 Chevy truck. And this, you can see that this has been put together by multiple pieces. You can kind of see the lines here where I've layered it and just put different pieces into however I can get this thing put together. And it's usually when you get to these end pieces, you're forming them on the truck. So you put one piece up to kind of get the line, and then you may have to add a bridge across the top, and you're just trying to build this up, and then you sand it back down and then fill in whatever gaps you need. Like here is just a big bunch of super glue to fill in this little void here. And the back is I believe this is like a 2-part plastic epoxy. It's moldable, so you just press that on and sand it down, and then just a bunch of styrene to get that back edge. And so the reason I did that back edge is it's such an overhang, it's so thin that if I did it with this wood, it would just break off, even with coating it with super glue. So to get that real thin, well-defined back edge back here, I built this up with styrene, and then dremelled and cut and sanded this down to the final shape to make this hood. The other thing you'll notice is that it sits up off of the table. It has these little, all of them, as a matter of fact, have these little blocks underneath them. And what you're doing there is you're raising the part up, this hood here, so that whenever you do the vacuum form, you have a well-defined edge. Because what happens if you have a piece that's laid flat on the table, no matter how good that vacuum pull is, when it comes around that corner, it'll be nice and sharp here. But when it comes down to this corner, it's going to be a radius. So if you wanted that to be a nice hard edge and to look just like this piece when you pull it out, you're going to have to raise that up. And so what happens if you raise that up, then the vacuum will pull that down and then under it slightly and then form the radius back to the table. And so when you get that part out, then you'll have a really nice defined sharp line to cut to. So that's why all of these are up on blocks, just to get those up a little bit higher. And here's another example of the 49 Chevy truck roof. And again, it's elevated up slightly to get the points up, some styrene around. And then here I just used Bondo. I had a pretty large area to come in and get shaped correctly. So I just skimmed coated it with Bondo and a little bit of, Tamiya putty here and there to fill in some gaps and super glue around the edges. And so pretty much whatever you can get to fill these things in and make them look, like you want to, then that's what you should do. You'll also notice there are some holes back here in this recessed area for the rear window. And so what happens is that when the plastic gets pulled in, because this is recessed, there's a chance that the air will create a pocket in here. It won't get a good form around here. So if you just drill some holes to let the air get pulled through, and then the vacuum can just suck down really tight against that, you'll have a much better much better pull in an area like that. And the last example I have here is another piece of MDF, and this is from the 49 Chevy truck. It's a driver's side running board, and so you kind of imagine that's the running board, and this is like a little piece that goes up, and the door would sit right here. So just a piece of MDF raised up on a block that's just slightly smaller, and I basically took a piece of PVC pipe, super glued it to there, added in some styrene, shaped this all down, got all these pieces set up, and so when you do that vacuum pull, what I'll do is I'll have a nice defined line to cut, and then cut right along here, and then right along here in the bottom, and you get the piece pulled out. So like I said, the most important thing to get a good vacuum pull is to have a good vacuum buck. It does take some time and practice, but after a little bit of seeing what will and won't work, you can have a good successful pull. Okay, so the next thing is the styrene plastic itself. This is typically what I'm using to make the hard bodies, and this is a 60 thousandths thick styrene. I ordered this in 12 by 24 sheets, but you can get it in larger stuff and cut it down yourself. I just find this is probably the most economical way for me to get this. I have looked at buying a 4x8 sheet and then cutting it down myself, and it is literally the same price, if not just a little bit cheaper, to have this shipped to my house already cut down than it is to buy the big sheets. And I honestly have no way to get it home anyway. So what I have is to take the 60 thousandths styrene, and I have this this holder, which is a piece of I believe it's 3/4 inch MDF and 1/4 inch MDF that are screwed together, and you'll see there's holes that's matching cut front and for the bottom and the top, and like these are just screws run around the edge to screw this down. You want to get your plastic sandwiched in between here, and this is what's going to hold the plastic as you're heating it up, and also when you're going to make your mold. So the next part is the heating element. And what I've chose to use here is a patio heater. And so this is literally what you would see, outside on your patio, or like maybe at a restaurant. It's I just have a box built to hold this unit, a couple little stands so that when the board goes down on top, it's not completely sealed off. And because I think there is a thermal overload in this one, so just I don't want the thing to get overloaded and hot. The unit, I want it to be able to heat up the plastic. So essentially what you'll end up doing is taking that form and placing that directly down on top of the heater once the heater is turned on. Now it's going to vary how long you want to keep this on, but what you're going to end up with is the plastic drooping, and that is also going to vary on how how big of a part you're trying to vacuum form around. If it's just small stuff, I think it's 2 or 3 times, I forget exactly what the rule of thumb is, but the height that you're trying to form, you want the droop. It's more of an art and a little bit of science to it. You get a feel for how much you want over time, but it's going to be a lot more than you think at first. It's going to be really spongy, and so just want to make sure you got a really good droop and the whole thing is nice and soft before you go and do any kind of vacuum pulls. So now we're getting into the heart of this operation, and this is the vacuum forming station. And if you've seen the build of this, you'll notice that before I went from kind of a more simplistic type station using a shop vac to what I have here, which is an actual vacuum pump, a tank, and all the gauges and stuff to perform this vacuum pull. So a couple of modifications I've made to this since that there's a fan that I placed here, and it's just basically like a fan you put into your hi-fi setup, and it just exhausts some of the heat out from where the vacuum pump is making, and so that comes on when the vacuum pump is on. I've also started the process of sealing up this top. So what I found out is that a vacuum will pull straight through this MDF wood, and I knew it would. I'd heard it would, but I didn't believe how much. And it is pretty much almost instantaneously goes through this, just like it had a big giant hole in it. So the first thing I did was I sealed the wood up with a polyacrylic, and that cut it down tremendously. And right now I'm in the process of sealing this entire box up with a fiberglass resin. So I've already seal coated the bottom, but I still have to come back to the sides and the top, and that theoretically should make this thing completely airtight and hold a really good vacuum. So what I have here to operate this on the side, so you flip the switch, turns on the vacuum. What the vacuum is running in this line, going down to the bottom line, which goes to a 11-gallon air tank, and you can see like the vacuum is getting pulled, and you can see the vacuum coming along on this gauge right here. So once I get the vacuum to where I want to, and it's going to be around negative 25 inches of mercury, it's plenty enough for what I'm doing here. But once I get it to that point, then I'll take and open the valve that leads up to this chamber. And what that does is that puts this chamber and all these little tiny holes under vacuum that's attached to that tank. When you have that hot piece of plastic that comes over, the first it'll do is it'll seal against this sealant right here. Then the vacuum will start to pull. When I open the valve, it'll suck the plastic down to this metal right here, and all of these holes along the edge where there's no part will start to seal up. And then what you'll have is the plastic will start to pull tight around whatever part you have, and because you have it raised up, it'll be able to suck under a little bit and get that nice radius and get the nice corner we talked about. And eventually, as the air just keeps getting pulled out of that, and you'll pull into a vacuum, you're going to have that plastic pull down tight, and eventually it's going to make a nice seal. So all this will be sealed up. The seal around the edge is just to get it started, and the real seal comes from when you start to plug these holes up, and that plastic sits firmly down around the edge. So I'll show you how that works, and when we get to actually making some of these pieces out of styrene. Okay, so as you can see, you get some really nice pulls with this table. Still some bugs I need to work out. I need to get the timing down right. The heating station I have is different height now. I shortened it up a bit, so I'm kind of playing through that. Just a couple little things here and there, but just things you learn over time with your setup. But this has a really nice vacuum pull on this, and so what you'll end up doing is flipping this over and then removing the plastic and then cutting it out. And so you end up with this sheet, and you have your molds in here, and then it's just a matter of cutting, back cutting, getting some of this, where the undercuts go in, and popping these original molds out, and they'll be ready to use again, and you'll have a nice styrene part. So now that you've liberated your vacuum bucks from the molded piece, you need to go in and do the final detail as far as getting the lines cut so you can get them glued on in place. Now these, for instance, I have them designed so that the cut edge is right here at the top. So what I usually do is come in from the back side with a Sharpie and just run it right along the inside here and just highlight that edge, so it just gives me a better visual when I'm cutting that out. And so what you'll just want to do is take a razor knife and then come and cut right along that line. So if you make a couple of relief cuts at the corner with the scissors, you can usually break that out, but if not, you can just come back and run that along again and give it another cut. So this stuff will tear if you get too aggressive with it. So one thing you can do is just kind of open it up a bit and then just run the razor knife right in the edge. The that you've opened up, and now you see you got a nice good seam. A little bit of sanding to do, and then that will, you know, glue flush right onto the inside of any vehicle, give you a you know, kind of just a generic looking door panel. The fenders in the back, I designed them so I can cut them out right along the top edge here, and so that's pretty well done. Now it's a little bit of cleanup work, some flat, you know, a little bit of flashing from the cut, sanding along there is fine. So now I got a really nice defined line that will match up with the you know, the bed and how this piece goes together. And what it gives you is an overhang lip for the rail, and then the bed will recess back in here. So you know, with a little bit of effort and a little bit of patience, you can get some really nice pieces. Okay, so we went over the general process of making vacuum form parts for RC cars. We touched briefly on making the vacuum buck, going through the process of heating up the plastic, putting it into the vacuum former, and getting a final part out, as well as a little bit as detail in you know, cutting the forms out once they're complete. You know, there's obviously a lot more to that than just what I've covered, but I think this gives you the idea, and the best way to figure this out is just to get out there and give it a try. Got a lot of fun little things coming up. But until then, we'll see you on the rocks.